Weekly MTG, the only show that typically comes to you from inside the building. But we're both Jules and I are on a little bit of COVID protocol, stay at home, not having to do with work, having to do with other stuff. But we're both fine. But we're at home, just being safe and all that jazz. But we wouldn't let that stop us from telling you about the Streets of New Capenna release, which Jules was one of the leaders on. So he knows so much about this set. We are going to blast your mind hole with information today. We're going to talk about a lot of the stuff that's already been previewed that Jules hasn't had the chance to tell stories about, talk about design behind, the reason why this is that and that is this and all that jazz. So we're going to talk about a bunch of cards there. We are going to preview one of the last remaining, if not the last remaining mythics from the main set. Then we're going to talk about a few remaining set booster exclusives and a little something we've got on the list that we haven't talked about yet. That's pretty cool. Before we do that, a little bit of news. Just a reminder this week in our news section that the April Super Drop is on sale. Head to secretlayer.wizards.com to learn more. There's bundles. That's what we do with Super Drops. There's a bunch of cool stuff there. A lot of weird, wacky art, couple artist profile pieces, that sort of stuff. So if you're curious, head to secretlayer.wizards.com to learn more. So, Jules, Streets of New Capenna, pretty cool set. Chat, we are going to answer your questions when we get. If you look down, I got to do it this way. Down, it's over like there, that way. Q&A is all the way at the end. So I will kind of be watching for questions that are put in chat, but if you want your question answered, that's going to be the time to do it. I'll let you know when I'm definitely going to be paying attention to questions. And he may answer some of your questions in the meantime anyway. So we are going to kick things off, Jules, with one of the, and this is saying a lot, one of the best dressed characters in the set, Nixlas, the adversary. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on here for a planeswalker. Tell us a little bit about the story behind this snappy dresser.
Yeah, so besides the stiff competition for suits, we really got started here. Every set since War of the Spark, when we opened up more Planeswalker design space, we've been taking a careful look at the keyword mechanics in the set and trying to figure out if they lend themselves to interesting Planeswalker designs. And when we looked at Casualty, we immediately thought, wow, this is such a cool match for Ob Nixilis. It gets to portray his like shadowy persona as the adversary that all of the demon family heads are worried about, and he kills Xander in the story, the head of the Maestros, who have the mechanic. Mm-hmm. And
yep.
Then it just came time to actually make a satisfying Magic card. That part turned out to be harder. We started trying static casualty numbers like you see on a bunch of the instants and sorceries on the set. But they made for all sorts of weird gameplay situations where players had to spend a ton of time thinking about stuff that probably wouldn't matter. It was like, oh, do I attack the token Ob Nixilis or the card Ob Nixilis? Because if I kill the token, then the card will still be there to legend rule a future Ob Nixilis. But if I kill the real Ob Nixilis, then maybe they can return it from their graveyard, and the person playing with Ob Nixilis had to make the same sorts of decisions about plussing or minusing it. And so we realized we needed some way to separate which Ob Nixilis to care about.
And that's how you landed on the Loyalty X and Casualty X.
Yeah, exactly. So then we got to the Casualty X scheme, which seems really exciting and has this awesome payoff of, well, now you can somehow have an enormous sacrifice and get a ton of loyalty. So we knew we needed to figure out how to make that matter, but also not necessarily end the game on the spot if you do it immediately. So we had to find an ultimate ability that could be super impactful, but that would only end the game if things were getting pretty late, and early game would just put you ahead, but you could keep playing.
Yeah.
So That's how we got to the draw 7, lose 7. You can finish them off with, or just get a full grip of cards that you probably won't have
Hmm.
mana to deploy early on. And
Yeah,
then
and
the
at a pretty steep
plus,
cost because that would be discarding or that would be sacrificing a 7 power creature if you get to do that immediately.
exactly. Yeah, which is tough to do early, but there might be some cards to help you with that.
Hmm.
Um, right, and then we had this whole other puzzle trying to get the plus and minus to play interestingly together because, right, Nixlas has this whole thing where you'll have two of them out, and so we don't want the pattern to get repetitive and be the same thing all the time, and we want abilities that speak to that. So we've got this sort of Punisher text on the plus where your opponent can choose to discard or have their life total go down. And
Hmm.
these sorts of effects get a lot stronger when you iterate them because either you'll run out of bad cards in your hand that you don't mind discarding, or your life total will start getting really low. And so plussing both your Obnixiluses at the same time has this little interplay to it. And similarly,
Mm.
on the minus, if you make multiple devil tokens, that'll allow you to actually stack up enough dies triggers to kill bigger creatures than a single devil could on its own. And
Hmm.
then this life gain text allows them to interplay with each other, where it's like, oh, well, now that I've got two Obnixiluses, I have some extra reason to want to make a devil with one and plus the other. So just a lot of stuff to make sure that game to game it'll vary a lot, like how you want to combine the abilities of your Obnixiluses. So instead of a normal Planeswalker situation where you've got, you know, two real options on what ability you want to do, here you've got a, combinatorial sort of
Hmm.
emergent pattern.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That's really cool. I hadn't thought about the, in my head I was looking at this like a normal planeswalker is like, oh yeah, on one turn you -2, and then in the next turn you +1, and that's a pretty normal pattern. You get the demon or devil bonus after that. But yeah, if you have two of them, obviously you can do that on the same turn and get the bonus immediately, which is pretty cool. All right, let's move on to another clever card. See what I did there? Tolu's Clever Conductor. So this is this is kind of part of a cycle with that weird mana cost in the upper right, which I'm sure you're going to talk about. And Tolu's Clever Conductor is a 3/1 legendary creature human rogue. When it enters the battlefield, it connives. And then when you discard one or more cards, which you do when you connive, of course, you exile it from your graveyard. And when Tolu's dies, put the cards exiled with it into their owner's hand. Let's start with that mana cost in the upper right hand corner, Jules.
Yeah. So three color cards are always super cool, but they're really limited into what decks you can play them in. And so every time we do a three color theme, we stare at the file and try to come up with ways that we can make some of the three color cards uh, bridge the gap a little bit better to work when you don't
Mm-hmm.
have all three colors of mana. All the way back
Mm-hmm.
in Invasion block, we had the Apprentices and Masters as cards with one color and activations of the other colors. And then Alara started experimenting with hybrid, with like a hybrid symbol and a different mana symbol, so it could be either set of two colors. You have the mythoses in Ikoria that are one color and reward you if you have both the other colors. And Mark Gottlieb came up with this approach to bridge not just to various two color decks, but actually monocolor to three color. You could play Toulouse for 3 blue mana or
Mm-hmm.
Esper.
Yeah.
Obscura. Okay.
Obscura. That's I'm too old and I've been playing too long. That's tough for me to get used to. But yes, Obscura, not Esper.
Yeah, you
It's
and me both.
we
It's
get what
okay.
people are dropping down. Yeah.
It's
Talk to
not a
us about the
crime to
text
call
on.
them.
It's not.
Go
It's
ahead.
not. So talk to us about the text on that card, the discard and get back when Toulouse dies.
Yeah, so this card actually came out of very early set design. Back when we started, Connive was always an enters the battlefield trigger. That was just tied into the keyword until Cameron Williams had pitched making it a keyword action that can appear in different settings. But in
Mm-hmm.
that early stage, we were doing a bunch of exploration on, if we are conniving, what extra tie-in can cool rares and mythics have that makes sense with your deck full of connive cards and does something interesting. And
Mm-hmm.
this text actually started on a mono blue card, the precursor to Ledger Shredder. But when we were working on the Obscura member of this cycle and not really liking what the card we were trying to make work did, we realized it was kind of a perfect fit for like black and white being able to recur your stuff from the graveyard versus blue sort of turning your looting into straight up card draw. So
Yeah,
it all matched from a color pie perspective. And
makes sense.
yeah, we,
All
we
right,
like this in play
cool.
a lot too.
It looks really cool. It's one of the cards I'm excited to build around. Maybe even a commander deck. Who knows? I have too many commander decks. I have to restrain myself. But maybe, maybe.
I haven't built a new
Um,
one since last week.
um. All right. Next up, we want to look at a trio of cards that have a some connective tissue where they all have alliance, but they also have the bit of extra text. If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, do an extra thing. So tell us about this sort of like mini loose cycle.
Yeah, so this actually came out of a previous version of the Cabaret mechanic. At one point, we were trying cards that all did something if two creatures had entered the battlefield under your control this turn instead of
Mm-hmm.
alliance. But we ran into problems as we started to build the set out with that. It was really insular. Like the Cabaret deck was great at turning all these cards on all the time, but when you played a monocolored card from the Cabaret in one of the neighboring families, it was just so hard to get your cards to trigger.
Mm-hmm.
But we did think the space was really fun. There's, we always build in a variety of how intricate the sequencing is on various different strategies you can take in environments because different people enjoy different amounts of that. But the Cabaret are all the way at sort of the most natural end, where if you just play your cards on curve, they'll trigger and build up the chain. So we wanted a little bit of extra intrigue on how to sequence your plays, and these
Mm-hmm.
captured that really well.
Very cool. Um, Next up, I want to look at a couple mythic rares. We're going to start with something central to the whole set, and one of the first cards we showed off, which is Halo Fountain, which is an artifact for 2 and a white that has 3 very interesting abilities. So for white, tap and untap a tapped creature you control. You get a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. For 2 white, tap and untap 2 tapped creatures you control. You can draw a card, so there's some more of that white card draw. And then finally, for 5 white mana, tap and untap 15 tapped creatures you control. You win the game. What the heck is going on here, Jules?
Yeah. So this card came out of us trying to really capture the feeling of the Cabaret, though it didn't start as a fountain. We began by trying to make a top-down design for a dance floor at a big Cabaret party and figure out
Mm,
what a party meant in terms of Magic.
yeah.
So pretty quickly we got to like, well, there's a the more the merrier thing. You should want a bunch of creatures in play, but you're not rallying an army to war. They should be doing something, you know, maybe cooperative or at least in good cheer rather than just smashing your opponent's face for combat damage.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so we started with a version that got effects by tapping untapped creatures you control. But the gameplay got pretty samey pretty quickly when you threw away combat entirely as anything you wanted to do. It's like, well, I'll
Right.
just sit here and tap all my creatures to the Halo Fountain and won't really matter what else I drew. It's just, can you kill me fast?
Yeah.
right. But by switching it to untapping them, which Michelle Robertson came up with, it's like we got to have our cake and eat it too. You sometimes want to get into combat, sometimes want to enable this with other cards that can tap your creatures, whether that's creatures that themselves have tap abilities or vehicles or who knows what. And, get to live the dream. We don't have to fight all the time. We can all win. Well, at least all of us who are playing Halo Fountain.
Just reading this card is such an adventure too, because you're like, tap one untapped creature, get a little, yeah, that's cool. Okay, tap two, untap, draw a card, cool. Tap 15, you win the game. It just like that escalated quickly.
Yeah, we futzed around with numbers on the last bit a fair amount. It was too strong at 10.
Fair enough. Let's try 15. Why not? All right, let's talk about another mythic with some gaudy numbers attached to it. A card that's been the subject of much discussion today. Meeting of the Five, which that's 8 mana total, 3 and Wooburg. It's a sorcery that exiles the top 10 cards of your library. You may cast spells with exactly 3 colors from among them this turn. You add a whole bucket full of mana, and then you spend that mana only to cast spells with exactly 3 colors. So you're definitely aiming to cast a bunch of 3-color spells here. What's going on with this, Jules?
Yeah, so we started here from the tension in the sea. There are these 5 crime families that have run everything, and there's a new adversary in town. The balance of power is shaken up, and they're worried. So what's it mean to have all of these family leaders, if not chummy, maybe willing to work together for a moment? And the first thing that came to all of our minds was Niv Mizzet Reborn back in War of the Spark, asking you to get lots of different 2-color cards, but for 3-color combinations. And we immediately ran into a bunch of trouble trying to make that work without a big creature body, and with 3-color cards being less plentiful than 2-color cards, we couldn't make anything very compelling just trying to put a bunch of them into your hand, especially because they cost more mana than 2-color cards do on average. You can't make 2-drops that are 3 colors very easily. Right, so then we thought about, well, is there a version where we cast them all for free? And it's like, there's no way to make a mana cost for that that'll be reasonable to play with all your 3 to 6 mana, 3-color cards in this set when you try to play it in standard or even in limited, and not just be totally obscene with some old cards like ultimatums that cost 7 mana in varying colors. Right, so we needed to find some way to slice between those things, and realized the best way to do it was to use the existing mana system on let you work with both things, but at appropriately scaled difficulty. So I've seen a lot of people going, oh, you can't even cast ultimatums with this, but it gives you 6/7 of the mana for the ultimatum that you need. You just need 1 left over. And this card's actually a fair bit easier to make work than it looks like. It's like, how am I going to make 5 colors and 8 mana and a million 3-color cards? And this set has answers for a lot of those questions. There's a lot of treasure generation that can both ramp you and fix your mana, and a lot of really flexible 3-color cards like charms that all do a bunch of different things and will have some use for whatever situation you're in when you get them off here and eat up some of the spare mana that you generate. So it's a lot easier to fill your deck with multicolor cards, and maybe even have other reasons to want to. If you're, playing widespread thieving and a bunch of gold cards, maybe we'll see something else later. Or even if you're just getting a bunch of value plays with Fleetfoot Dancers or big smashy things like Ziatora. There are a lot of different tacts you can take and ways to combine stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
between gold cards that are in your hand to use up the excess mana or excess treasures you have lying around to cast more of the 3-color cards you hit off this, uh, getting the higher end of the value off of it is not as hard as it sounds.
Okay. All right. Well, you kind of mentioned the plentiful mana fixing in this set, and there are treasures, but there's also a cycle of 5 cards that do something we haven't seen before, and are super interesting to me. They don't. I don't think the cycle has a name yet. They're named a little bit differently, but it's a Sparta's Adjudicators, Shattered Seraph, Glamorous Outlaw, Masked Bandits, and Rakish Revelers, and they all are creatures in their own right that cost 3 mana, 3 colors of mana, and then also have that text to exile this creature from your hand. Target land gains the ability to make 3 colors of mana until that card is cast from exile. So this is a little out there. How did you all come up with these, Jules?
Yeah, they're definitely a little on the complicated side for common, and we didn't start here. But right, as you mentioned, we need color fixing, and a lot of it for limited as well as constructed. And we can't just flood the limited format with infinite treasures everywhere. Well, we'll
Mm-hmm.
see why in a second. Uh, right, so we, you know, wanted to figure out the right level of fixing for this environment, and the clear place to look in our past was at Khans of Tarkir, which was a beloved limited format for a lot of people, but didn't fully deliver on the 3-color promise for people who really wanted to
Mm-hmm.
play decks that were solidly 3 colors, maybe playing 2 drops in all 3 of your colors rather than being heavy on 2 colors and dipping into a third. Uh,
Yeah.
but if we just cranked up the level of normal fixing a lot, the format quickly becomes 5-color soup where you can just play everything, including if we have too much early cheap treasure.
Yeah.
Uh, so the other side of this problem is we want a lot of cool gold 3-color cards. Players love these. This set has more than we've ever done before, but if you have a ton of 3-color cards and are missing one of your colors of mana, they're going to get stuck in your hand. Khans of Tarkir
Mm-hmm.
tried to address this with having morph on the common 3-color cards. And so we initially started trying to do something similar with a keyword we called smuggle that basically let you send your cards on an adventure to make a treasure token. But
Mm-hmm.
there was no good cost for it. At 2 mana, it was just super powerful. Even if the card itself was pretty weak, you would play a bunch of these. They would easily fix all your colors, let you splash a million different colors. And at 3 mana, they were just too slow to actually get you to do the thing and might not even help you with color screw if you only had 2 lands, and you're more likely to get color screwed the fewer lands you have.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we tried a bunch of like various restrictions on 2 mana versions, but they all ended up being really unwieldy or unfun.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we took a step back and went, okay, we don't really want the treasure play anyway. These want to fix you for the mana in their faction. How can we do that? And the answer we got to is pretty texty, but not that complicated once you figured out what it does. So, sort of a trade off on, trying to read these cards versus continuing to play with them. But
Yeah.
don't get lost in all the text. These work out a lot better than you might guess in limited. And think
Yeah,
they're all
yeah.
pretty
Well, I mean,
strong
they seem fairly straightforward once you know how they work and read through them. 2 mana, put them on a land. That land now taps for the 3 colors of the card, and later you can actually cast it, which seems
drafts.
pretty cool. Yeah, I definitely I couldn't place. I'm glad you brought up Khans of Tarkir because I couldn't place like what these reminded me of. But you're right; they remind me of the three color morph creatures from Khans of Tarkir, which I should have thought of because that's literally the uncut sheet that's on my wall behind us. It's yeah, I'm like staring at them every day, all day. Um, which yeah, they were something you could play for three colorless mana, and then once you had the mana, you could flip them up and have them have some abilities. So, very cool solution to that.
Yeah, these even go a
Next
step.
up, oh, go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, these even go kind of a step further. If you never draw your third color, you can still, squirrel them away, and then eventually they'll fix one last time to cast themselves.
True story. Next up, an interesting design, brass knuckles. So this is a 4 mana artifact equipment that when you cast the spell, you just immediately copy it. And then equipped creature has double strike as long as 2 or more equipment are attached to it, and then equip 1. So this card literally, if it's the only equipment attached to your creature, does nothing. Just does just straight nothing. But when you put 2, then we're talking some business. So where did this card come from?
Yeah, brass knuckles are really emblematic to the whole mob trope space that we were playing into. They were one of the first concepts to make it into the card file right as it was being built out. They're even the set symbol for that reason. But
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to figure out what they were really supposed to do. Our first renditions were like keeping creatures damaged by the equipped creature from untapping. It's like you got beaten to a pulp, but it wasn't really on the nose and endearing to people. So
Mm-hmm.
we actually sent this out to the Friday design group, where a bunch of members of Wizards who don't normally work on like Magic game design uh, take one of their lunches to tackle design problems that various teams are struggling with and just give a new perspective. And
Mm-hmm.
right, they came up with uh, a couple of different iterations on this idea of like the 1-2 punch for your brass knuckles. We're like, oh, maybe you need 2 pieces of equipment, or someone else was like, maybe it should give double strike. And we
Mm-hmm.
combined those ideas for the perfect knuckle sandwich.
Very cool. All right, we are going to finish up with one last card in review before we move into previews. And it is so when I work on the preview plan, as I'll give a little intro here, we tend to assign the commons last. They're often some of the least complicated. They don't pop quite as much. They're often things that are great for limited, and it's important for that. So we tend to assign them later in the preview season. But I saw this one and immediately knew we needed to assign it just because of the creature that it becomes is named Legitimate Business Person. This is also a strong card in and of its own right, but it makes legitimate business person. So where the heck did witness protection come from?
Yeah, this was another early one of the tropes in the file. It's just a resonant piece of the genre for people going into hiding after ratting out their uh,
Mm-hmm.
criminal accomplices. Um, so we started out with a version that like took away the creature's name, and then we realized we wanted to turn it into basically the same creature the citizen tokens were. So we went, great, it'll be named Citizen,
Mm-hmm.
and that stuck for a while. But then Crimson Vow rolled around and uh, changed a little tiny rule about how default token names are generated. So if you make a blood token, its name isn't actually blood, it's blood token. So it won't get caught by cards naming the old split card flesh and blood. Uh,
Sure.
so that's all great, but it made changing a card's name to Citizen that wouldn't have token not work intuitively with cards that care about creatures sharing names like Echoing Courage, and so we decided we should probably move off of that. And Delwoggle asked, well, what if we set a specific name of some sort? And
Mm-hmm.
we're like, all right, what's a reasonable one? And we'd been recently going through the sort of penultimate naming pass on the set, giving cards attempts at their final names that we'd then show a bunch of people internally and get review on. And we cut legitimate business person from a card that's art didn't really end up quite syncing up with it, but everyone
Mm-hmm.
playtesting it loved the name, and so Carmen Handy realized it was the perfect spot to put it back on this card.
Yeah, it worked out great. I still laugh every time I see it. Okay, let's move on to the main event. We have four, five-ish previews, depending on how you count the card from the list as a preview. And one of those cards is the main set Mythic, as you can see at the bottom. And then we've got three of the set booster exclusive commander cards to talk about here. And in that section, we'll also talk about the sort of unique card from the list. So let's start with the main set Mythic. It is called Titan of Industry, which has two different versions here. So Titan of Industry, 4 and 3 green for a creature elemental, 7/7. It's got reach, it's got trample. And when Titan of Industry enters the battlefield, choose 2. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Target player gains 5 life. Create a 4/4 green Rhino Warrior creature token. That's 11 power right there. Or put a shield counter on a creature you control, which could include Titan of Industry. Jules, this thing is big. It does all the things. How'd this card come about?
Yeah, this one really came from a top-down angle, but not on the mobster tropes like a lot of the stuff we've seen. Instead,
Mm-hmm.
thinking about this like big city, we were asking ourselves like, what are the big creatures supposed to be here? It's, kind of weird if you've just got enormous stuff trying to crowd into the little streets, except for the ones that are already there. Could we have like a
Mm-hmm.
skyscraper elemental? What's that mean? Mostly the answer we got to was some enormous creature, maybe a ramp top end or reanimator target.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, right. And so we started asking ourselves, like, what angle on those haven't we covered that's really going to make for fun games? And usually strategies like that, you're devoting a lot of time and resources to just, getting your strategy to pay off. You need to get cards into your graveyard to reanimate something or play a lot of mana generation. And then
Mm-hmm.
you're behind your opponent on some axis when you finally get there. So we came up with this right sort of charm approach, so the Titan
Mm-hmm.
could catch you up against whatever it was that you were playing against. And so, if you are worried about getting your board swept, you need some resiliency, the shield counter's perfect. It'll keep it from getting destroyed. If you're getting beaten
Mm-hmm.
down really hard, you can gain life. Problematic permanents you can destroy, needing to block a bunch of different stuff, you can get your rhinos. So plays out differently depending on what you're playing against, but always sort of serves this role of swinging the game around when you finally get your plan online.
Yeah. And just a rules clarification that I saw in chat, it says choose 2. You can only pick each mode once, correct? You can't pick any mode twice.
Right. So
All right,
yeah,
cool.
you'll need to combine them, but it's rarely bad to have a rhino, so it's not too hard to find 2 modes that you're going to want.
Right. All right, let's move on to some of the set booster previews. Now, before we dive into these, the set boosters, that's kind of part of another mini team that works on this, right? Who's responsible for these cards?
Yeah, so Chris Mooney was the primary person heading these up. They did a lot of the design and were responsible for picking exactly where everything ended up, though, of course, like all our
Mm-hmm.
cards, these got play testing and commentary and discussion from a whole bunch of different people.
All right. Let's start with a pretty cool mono white card, Benny Brax, Zoologist. So, Benny Brax, Zoologist, is 3 and a white for a legendary creature, Elf Druid. It's a 3/2, has Convoke, which is certainly interesting on a card that might be in your command zone. And then at the beginning of each end step, if you created a token this turn, draw a card each end step. Yeah, what can you tell us about this card?
Yeah, well, as you've probably noticed in a lot of the spoilers for this set, we've been hard at work trying to figure out the right ways to go about having white draw cards. And
Mm-hmm.
a few of our tenets are, it should be a reward for your deck trying to do something that white very much wants to encourage. Making a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of little tokens is a great example of that. But we also want it to play differently from card draw in other colors. Blue will often do big bursts of card draw where you're drawing like 5 cards at once, and
Mm-hmm.
white takes a more slow and steady approach on getting your cards doled out over time. Uh, but white's always got ways to cheat the rules. This card, you might just make some tokens on your opponent's turns and go, yeah, 1 card a turn. Great, my turn and your turn and your turn and your turn. Uh, so we wanted this one to be really available to a wide range of white decks that are doing white things and help
Mm-hmm.
catch white up on that front in Commander.
Yeah.
And you
And I
alluded to
do want to.
the
Oh, go ahead.
right, and you alluded to the Convoke earlier. In the command zone, this is pretty sweet because no matter how high the commander tax gets, if you've just got enough creatures out, you can pay for the commander tax with the Convoke too.
Yep, absolutely. And chat's catching on to this, but I want to point out on first reading of the card, people might gloss over this, but it says if you created a token this turn, not a creature token. So treasure, food, any kind of token you might, people are pointing out smothering tithe with this is pretty bonkers. There are a lot of ways to draw cards on everyone's turn with this card because they do not have to be creature tokens. Helm of the Host, producer Sean throws in there. Like there's a bunch of ways to get this card going. So I foresee this ending up helming a lot of commander decks. Next up, another card from the set booster exclusives for Commander is Tenuous Truce. Tenuous Truce is another white card. For 1 and a white, it is an enchantment aura. At the beginning of enchanted opponent's end step, you and that player each draw a card. It has the words. Woo! It has the words. When you attack enchanted opponent or a planeswalker they control, or when they attack you or a planeswalker you control, sacrifice Tenuous Truce. So yeah, this is white card draw, but really there's something else going on here. Tell us about this card, Jules.
Right. So this is sort of the other angle on the white card draw, as opposed to like play cards that are what white's asking you to do. It's play the game like how white wants you to play it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Play nice, uphold your word, be a good citizen. Uh,
Yeah.
so right, we've seen some amount of white card draw in the recent past. Starting with Strixhaven, uh, having you and an opponent draw some cards, and there's sort of some implied collaboration, but you can do a little bit better if you really sign a contract and have to abide by it.
Mm-hmm.
Whether your would-be trusted ally wants to join in on that is probably going to depend on your play group. Maybe they'll stab you in the back.
Yeah, I like this kind of political card that you can both stare at each other and you're like, I want to keep doing this. I want to keep doing this, but I want to attack you so much.
Mm.
Um,
You get to play the little game of slights. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna kill
yeah.
your big threat, but I won't attack you. So you don't wanna take issue with me killing your creature, right?
All right, next up, let's look at a card called Threefold Signal. So, Threefold Signal is an artifact for 3 mana, and when it enters the battlefield, scry 3. There's a bunch of threes on this card. Each spell you cast that's exactly 3 colors has replicate 3. There's a word we haven't seen in a while. For those of you not familiar with replicate, there's some reminder text there. When you cast it, copy it, it being the spell. For each time you paid its replicate cost, you may choose new targets for the copies. Copy of a permanent spell becomes a token. So if you pay 3 mana additional, you get 1 copy. If you pay 6 mana additional, you get 2 copies. 9 mana, 3 copies, which is really the only way to play this card. You have to get at least 3 copies. Otherwise, what are you even doing? But Jules, there's a lot of threes on this card. Where did this card come from?
Yeah, so I mentioned there were more another 3 color card incentive, and that was the origin here. Was we've got a bunch of 3 color cards. What would make you want to play a deck that was just chock full of them? What can you do in this space that's not the, color matters space we've seen explored in Ravnica's before? And so, things have changed since last time we saw replicate. Nowadays, you can copy permanent spells and have them become actual permanents. And so Chris identified that and realized there was a very 3Z card to be made, caring about your 3 color spells, letting you get 3 of them. And, I would read into this one a little bit more. How many 3s are there on it?
I mean, are we including the art? Because I
Well, that
guarantee
might.
there's some. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
tough.
but
The card number is also 93 of 93. Like, I bet we can go deep on this. There are more. I say this. There are more than 3 3s on this card.
that's true. Just 3 of the numeral in the rules relevant parts, 3 of the word in the rules relevant parts.
Somebody online is going to tell us eventually. All
Indeed.
right. Yeah, so those are 3 of the set booster exclusives. The other ones in that Commander Legal set booster exclusive card group, those have been previewed elsewhere. You should have seen, I believe all of them are out as of today. Those should have been the last ones. We do have one more preview for you, and it's a bit of an interesting one because we've done some cool things with the list in the past, and we should also point out Streets of New Capenna is where the list will also contain the in Magic versions of the Stranger Things cards that were a secret layer last year. So that in and of itself, really cool thing with the list. There are not really reprints, but kind of reprints in the list. But we're doing something else cool, which is we are reprinting a card, but we're giving it one of the set's treatments, the sort of gilded frame. So let's take a look at Rifiq of the Many, that is getting a reprint on the list. Jules, what's going on here?
Yeah, so you've seen us mess around with trying to find more places for sweet showcase treatments that make sense, right? In secret layers, even in this upcoming drop. But we've got all these cards on the list that from all over Magic and say something to the set and got us thinking, all right, well, we should experiment a little here, try something new and see how it works. So this is sort of an alternate universe Rafiq of the Many. Rafiq's from Alara, not from New Capenna, but they've also got, a 3 color theme with the same sets of 3 colors. So it's sort of like, well, what if we did set Rafiq on New Capenna? What's that look like in the showcase version in this alternate universe?
Okay, cool. So, and just to reiterate, this will be part of the list. So, found in 1 out of every 4-ish, I believe, set boosters. Correct?
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Right. That's not actually like figuring out those rates is not actually
Yeah.
Jules's job. So I'm putting him on the spot a little bit, but um, okay, so we have about 15 minutes left. So, chat, this is your time to shine. This is your time to put your questions in chat. It is going to be easier for me to see your questions if you start with at magic, just so that I can pick it out of all the conversations that you all are having. And we are going to start with a question for me, actually, because I saw several people ask this. When are the commander deck lists being posted? So we are planning to post the deck lists on the 19th next week. If you want to just wait for all the deck lists, we're aiming for later in the day on the 19th. What's happening is there are 5 outlets that are embargoed for Monday, the 18th. They are European outlets, and there's a bank holiday in Europe. So there's a little like some of them will be on the 18th, some of them will be on the 19th. But if you check out the where to find article, we'll keep that updated and share when those go out. Next up, let's see. Okay, Jules, this is a question for you. You may or may not know the answer to this one, actually. So most
All
of the
right.
list cards have the little planeswalker symbol in the bottom left-hand corner. The image we just showed of Rifiq does not. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure where that landed, but I know in discussions it was like that symbol exists largely so you can tell the list version of the card apart from the original, and despite that one
Right.
having the Alara set symbol, no one's gonna confuse it with the card out of an Alara booster pack.
Yep. What does the art of the treasure token look like in this set? We will be showing tokens off next week. All right. Next up, let's do. All right, Sean. I'm gonna if you can queue up Bootleggers Stash for another card for a question. Once you have that ready, we'll ask that question. Um, let's start with this. Jules, are there any new designs from this set that you're particularly excited for?
Mm. I'm gonna have to go for. Oh, I don't know. There are a lot. I'm gonna have to go for Falco Spara. Just
Okay.
for those who don't know, Falco can sort of let you cast spells off the top of your library by removing counters from your permanents, and he's got a shield himself. So I don't know. I love all these little sequencing puzzles and finding weird uses for cards that have never had them before. I want to pull counters off my cumulative upkeep cards and reset my persist creatures. All sorts of wildness in Commander, and I think it plays out in a pretty fun way in Standard with counters that aren't quite as
Ye-
far afield as well.
Yep. Yeah, the cumulative upkeep interaction really brings me back and speaks to me. That was my first thought too, which again speaks to how old I am. All right, so we have a couple questions that are about Bootlegger's Stash and related cards. So Bootlegger's Stash, for those who don't know, is there it is, a 6 mana artifact for 5 and a green. It says lands you control have tap, create a treasure token. So there's been a lot of conversation about this card. And then, so we got first, why is Bootlegger Stash a green card? I've seen quite a bit of conversation about this in the community.
Mhm.
And then, related question, how did green become part of the treasure theme of the set? Of course, in the past, treasures have particularly been centered around red. They kind of debuted with red, black, and blue with the pirates on Ixalan. So, how did they end up in green? How is Bootlegger's Stash green? Go.
Yeah. So a lot of our treasure exploration throughout Magic has been, trying to find really flavorful stuff for where it's supposed to go. And here it kind of made sense to everyone. All the families want Halo and riches. So
Mm-hmm.
this is our first chance getting to see treasure really not pushed in a certain direction by the set flavor, but where it's mechanically centered from a color pie perspective, which is in red and green for somewhat different executions. Right? Red is
Hmm.
all about living in the moment and doing temporary things, and this like little burst of mana from treasure plays very much like a ritual into that like red space
Right.
where I want to play it all now and use it. On the other hand, green is by far number one at mana generation. That's like the core greatest green strength, sort of like blue's got counter magic, green's got ramp. This has to be a major aspect of green, and treasures are a big way to do that. Just, you know, there are it's an execution of mana generation that leans into some red space, and so we do it there. But the same way green gets both rampant growth and mana elves, treasure is another subset of here that plays within green's sphere. So we try to separate how the cards play out in that way. Red's treasure has to actually be limited or temporary to play into that temporary aspect like a ritual. If a red card just made a treasure every turn no matter what, then it's kind of like if the card tapped for a mana, you just have this stable resource you know you're going to have. Whereas greens gets to be a consistent resource. That's something green ramp can do. So Bootleggers Stash on its own without synergies plays a lot like an Upwelling, a card that lets you keep your mana around. It's sort of
Sure.
the opposite of how red wants to play into its mana generation.
Okay, makes sense. Next up, we'll do one for you, one for me. Will the trailer still drop on digital release day since it's after the release time? Yeah. The reference for this question is that typically we've been releasing the set trailer on digital release day. But also typically digital release day has come before the pre-release. So the question is now that for Streets of New Capenna, the tabletop pre-release is happening before the digital release. The question is, when will the trailer drop? The trailer is planned for the digital release, so April 28th. So look for it then, and make sure that you check out your local game store for your tabletop pre-release the week before that. Um, Next up, we can answer this card quickly, or this question quickly. Why no card for Giada? There is one. There is one. Um, let's see. Um, All right. Jules, lore isn't your area. You may or may not be able to answer this. So on Ravnica, there were some guilds that were constantly at odds. In New Capenna, are there any lore-based enemies among the families?
Yeah, the short answer is sort of all of them, but it's more of a competition than like outright war. They're all competing for, turf in the city and access to the Halo supply and promising criminal opportunities. So it shifts a lot. The families will be competing with each other and might form a temporary alliance for accomplishing some goal in the meantime, but no one's friends for long.
Okay. Next question is I've seen this put a couple different ways, so we'll ask it. So in the playtest cards from the mystery booster stuff, there was a mechanic called ransom, which flavorfully seems like a good fit here. Was ransom ever anything that you all tried or thought about for this set?
Yeah, it was never a big piece. The main problem is it is a lot less fun to play with when it's high in quantity. Ransom's a really
Mm,
fun thing when one card gets ransomed in a game, but if a bunch get ransomed, then suddenly instead of being this cool choice of like, oh, do I want that card back or do I need to make the tempo plays of keeping on deploying my other cards? I just have no other cards. I'm stuck here not getting to do anything except spend my mana trying to get my card back, only to maybe get it ransomed away again.
mhm. All right. Next question. We'll keep going back and forth. Will the commander decks be available on Midgo? So, the way the commander cards work on Magic the Gathering Online is the decks themselves are not released. What happens is that most of the cards, if not all of the cards, are released as part of treasure chests later down the line. So they show up, but they show up in a little bit of a different way. Let's see. I'm seeing the question about how many cards from the main set will be in the commander decks. We're just going to say wait and see on that. The commander decks will be previewed early next week. The question about Rifiq to see if again the sort of mechanical side of producing cards is not Jules' area, but let's say if you know the answer to this, does that Rifiq come in foil?
I don't actually remember where that ended up.
Okay. Yeah, typically the list cards do not come in foil, but we did something special, so we don't know. We can find that answer after the stream. All right, we are nearly out of time. I am gonna find. Oh, you know what? Here's a perfect question to end on. Actually, it's a perfect question to end on. After we'll do one more Streets of New Capenna focused question. And then we'll answer this other question. Okay, so I've seen this question in a number of different ways. So maybe you can speak to this. So in the story, all of the angels are gone. We learned why. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read the story, but the angels are missing from New Capenna, and yet the set itself has some angels in it. So what happened there, Jules?
Yeah, so the story played a bit coy on the end, but I don't want to spoil it. The angels don't all stay gone forever. I would recommend checking out the card Soul of Emancipation when you get a chance. Hopefully, it'll make things a little clearer.
Great. Okay. That was the last SNC question. Sorry to everyone whose SNC questions I didn't get to. We are just about out of time. So I want to answer this question. Is there any info on Command Fests? Not today, but hey, let's talk about next week's show. Next week's show on the 21st. It's just going to be me talking to you. It is monthly announcement day. So monthly announcement day has a bunch of stuff going on. We have some arena focused announcements. I know last month when we gave the tabletop premier play system, we teased that before the end of April we would have the digital premier play system. So that will be part of the day on the 21st. We've got another arena focused announcement on that same day, all about ways to play arena. And then we are also going to talk about Command Fest. So we're very excited to reveal some details about the return of Command Fest. That'll happen next week. We have a couple other smaller announcements as part of that whole stream. But yes, monthly announcement day next week on the 21st. We will fill you in on Command Fest and some other stuff. So definitely tune in for that. And thank you for tuning in today. Thank you, Jules, for joining us and telling us all about Streets of New Capenna. There is so much more to learn about the set. We fit in as much as we could. The full card image gallery with all of the, it's mostly just commons at this point, that have not yet been revealed will be up tomorrow morning on dailymtg.com. And then the commander decks will be officially revealed early next week, between Monday and Tuesday, where you'll learn about what those 4 decks have in store. So thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week.